Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit series. So in this series we're covering some very important defenses and some very important sidelines of defenses after the first moves d4, d5 and c4. And today we're continuing again with our Slav defense series, and recently we have talked about this check variation of the Slav defense. Now today we're analyzing the so-called Steiner variation of the Slav defense. I think the Steiner variation, it's much more aggressive. It's a much more aggressive approach of blacks, and I think there are many tactical traps that you can fall into, and I think in this video we can solve at least some of them, because there are many ways to lose the game in an early stage of the game. Believe me, I've been there, because in the Steiner variation I had really some trouble how to develop my minor pieces further. I got many times into some tactical traps, and that's why I don't want you for you to happen the same, because now I think you should be familiar with one particular line, and I think you can solve all of your positional problems in an early stage of the game. So let's check out now the Steiner variation. So we have d4, d5, so c4, c6 so far the Slav defense, knight to f3, knight to f6, and knight to c3, the so-called three knight variation. And in my opinion, again, I'm repeating you, we have talked about these ideas recently. D takes c4 is, in my opinion, really the best way here for black to proceed. Now white's best way, I think, is to proceed with the move a4, which is now the so-called Alpin variation. Now we have the move bishop to g4, which is now the so-called Steiner variation. So this check variation was the move bishop to f5. It's a more positional battle, and we have seen in the check variation, first black is playing the move bishop to f5, then black is afterwards trying the move bishop to g4. Here it's an early bishop to g4 move by black, and the main goal of blacks is simply to undermine the pressure. Maybe you can try something like, I don't know, bishop to g5. Let's see, maybe not the best of moves here for white. Then you could face maybe this positional idea of black's bishop to f3, and then after g takes f3, the problem is now white will have trouble to castle, because the pawn structure in front of the king after potential castling is already messed up, and also on the queen side with the move a4 we have already weakened the pawn structure. So it's, I think, sort of an endangered king's position, potential endangered king's position for white. Black could try normal development with e6, bishop to d6, queen to c7, knight from b to d7, then e4 or e5 or c5, breaking the center. So this would be, I think, a normal aggressive approach of black. So that's why after the move bishop to g4, when you face that, the best way here is to proceed here with the move knight to e5. And there are also now some other ways for black to proceed with knight to d7, simply leaving the bishop unprotected, trying to trade off this very powerful knight for the bishop. But many times you see this particular line with the move bishop to h5, and bishop to h5 is a very annoying idea of blacks, because you would love to play here this move e3, which you cannot do. You would love to play this move and then take out maybe here the pawn, bishop takes c4, queen to b3, but this move e3 is of course not possible. This bishop is very annoying. So that's why here you have to play first the move f3. f3 is the best suggested move by the engine, but when I face here the Steiner variation, I like a different line. I like to move h3, then to play g4, maybe even e4, f4, simply creating a kingside pawn storm, then bishop to g2, supporting this bishop, here bishop to g5, rook to c1, then afterwards, so maybe then afterwards kingside castling and similar ideas. But here, as we said, if you put this position into the engine would suggest you to move f3. What I don't like about the move f3 is that you weaken the pawn structure in front of the king a little bit, that you could be vulnerable to some dark square attacks. But as I said, f3 actually the best way here simply for white. So here black will try the move e6, simply developing the dark square bishop. Bishop to b4 is now sort of a positional idea to again create a new pin against this knight on c3. And now you can face, of course, this move e4 is also the best suggested move by the engine, simply getting this pawn central control. Very powerful setup here. And now this bishops can play bishop to g5, bishop takes c4, queen to b3. Again, white has a decent position. So here bishop to b4, now g4 is really one of the most aggressive ways here to proceed from white's perspective, and you face now many times this idea by black. Knight takes e4. Knight takes e4 is a tricky tactic, and I think you can solve this position immediately if you play now the next couple moves very correctly. If you make a slight inaccuracy, then white is simply lost, because we should simply simply take, and now comes this idea with the move f3. As I said, you have weakened a little bit the pawn structure in front of the king. Now queen to h4 is a tricky move, and there are now basically two ways how to proceed here. You can play the move king to e2 and king to d2. King to e2 here is a disaster because it's simply losing for white. King to d2 is simply winning for white. So that's why you should be familiar with this idea, king to d2, not to play the move king to e2, because if you play king to e2, you get this idea, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, the e4 is not protected anymore, so the knight was there. That's the main issue here. And now after bishop to g4, we have knight takes g4, queen to g4, king to d2 could be played, but now queen to f4, and wherever you go, king to c2, king to e2, or king to e1, you get the same tactic, queen takes e4, the double attack against the king and also against the rook, and white is simply lost. So that's why you should be careful with this idea. After move queen to h4, king to e2, it's not good. King to d2 has to be played, because you see now what happens if you play king to d2. Then okay, black can try maybe queen to f2, creating a check, not a problem. We can try to trade off more pieces. The problem is now maybe this line, but no problem at all. Queen to d4, new check, not a problem. King to c2, maybe black can take out the knight, but you can also take out the bishop, and from this point on, it's obvious that white has solved, I think, all of the tactical problems, is continuing the game with an extra piece. Of course, black has some extra pawns, but I think at least we're not vulnerable to some dangerous attacks. Maybe black can try something like knight to a6, queen to f3, the bishop takes c3, b takes c3, maybe knight to b4. I found one great game in this particular line, knight to b4. We have king to b1, knight to d3, bishop to d3. Here I think again that black's attacks is simply splashed. Black doesn't have any more so many great attacking opportunities, so white won the game very easily here. So you should be careful. As said, let's go back. Knight to e4, still you can take, f takes e4, no problem. Queen to h4, king to d2 is now solving all of our positional problems, trading off the queens. Here takes, and it's game over for black. So let's see now a new opening disaster. Again, we have reached this position, so the Steiner variation, bishop to g4, knight to e5. Now black again retreats with the move h5, bishop to g5. I've analyzed also. I saw many times this move by white, but actually you should not do this. You should I think develop your king side fast here. The bishop on g5 seems like a dangerous idea, but actually it's not the best of moves, because you in this example, in this particular game, it's a game played by Wolfgang Ullmann against Matthias Schurale. I wanted to point you out that in this Steiner variation, the fast development is very important. If you stay with the king in the center too long, that you could be vulnerable to some attacks here. Knight to d7 was played, knight takes c4. It seems so that white is solving every positional problem now, but now h6, bishop to h4, e6. You see black is trying to develop the pieces, bishop to e7, bishop to g3, but white lost a new tempo with the bishop to g3. It seems so that white has a dominant position all over the board, but after castling now, white makes suddenly the mistake with the move e3. You see the white is two more moves far away from kingside castling, and after move c5, you see black has developed all of the minor pieces, has secured the king by castling, and now after c5, black tricked, I think, white here a little bit, because white fell into a tactical trap with the move queen to b7, and basically from this point on, the game is lost, because black has immediately opportunities to simply take, c takes d4, the center gets more and more open, because black plays now the move e5, knight takes e5, and now rook to b8, attacking the queen, queen to c6, and now rook takes b2. You see black is really trying to open the position somehow in the center, because the king is in the center. This is the way how to attack the king in the game. Knight to d7, we have bishop to b4, so black doesn't even care for this knight on d7 in the continuation. Knight to f8 was played, but again, black doesn't simply care for these pieces. The activity of black pieces is simply too much to handle for white, and maybe you can pause the video now and try to see now the best continuation here for white, pardon me, for black. This move wins the game immediately for black. It's not, of course, the point to take out the knight the great move here is actually great deflection motif by queen move, queen to e8, and now if you for instance take queen to e8, you get simply bishop takes c3, and it's a checkmate. So this example I think is very important. This example shows how sometimes we forget about the king security, how we sometimes develop the minor pieces too late, because this idea of the move bishop to h5 that black plays in the beginning, let's go back, stops I think a little bit white's progress. So as said, bishop to h5 stops a little bit the normal progress of the move e3. White would love to play the move e3, then bishop to c4, queen to b3, but you see so far it's not possible. So that's why the best way simply is to play f3, g4, e4, h5, trying this kingside flank attack. But we have seen after the move f3 that you could also face some tactical problems. So let's see now another example. Again, we have reached this position with knight to e5, again bishop to h5. We have now again f3, here black can try this move knight to d7, challenging the knight to c4, and now you see many times also this line e5. It's a gambit line by black. Black is again trying to use this moment where you have played this very unnatural move f3, and is trying now to break the position in the center, but still you can take knight takes e5. But actually here the better way is simply to take with the pawn. D takes e5 is much better, because you should not trade off these two pieces. You should not trade off this knight, because then black can again play knight takes e5, d takes e5, and then knight to d7, play simply an attack with this other knight. Queen to e7 will happen, and black will find some great ways to how to counterplay this position. So that's as I said here, after move e5 you face this move many times in the Steiner variation. Now you should simply play d takes e5, and I think black is simply strategically and tactically lost. I'm not seeing good ways where to go with your knight. You could try maybe knight to d5, but again we can simply take knight takes d5, queen to d5. So let's see now this possible continuation. I found a game which shows again some other mistakes by white, mistakes by black, and I think these are very common mistakes. I've been there, believe me. I had my trouble from white, from black's perspective, in the Steiner variation. Knight to e5, d takes e5, and now knight to d7. Actually black should have probably simply trade off the queens and then go knight to d7, trying to attack this position. Here in the game, knight to d7 was played. We have now e4, bishop to c5, trying to prevent white from castling, bishop to e2, knight takes e5, and now queen to d8. Here rook to d8, and here after move g4 actually black resigned, because what to do if you try even here bishop to g6, you get f4 and then f5. I think this trap is very often also in the Steiner variation, because maybe not in the same move order, but this idea after potential knight to e5, here g4 and then f4, you should always memorize this kind of a tactic, because you have there on the king side from white's perspective 4 extra pawns. And that's something that you should always memorize. The bishop on g6 is a vulnerable piece, although in the beginning the bishop on h5 was a very annoying piece, but now you see the bishop can be an object of white's attack. And now after move g6, it's really g4, pardon me, and bishop to g6, black immediately resigned, because he realized that f4 will happen. There's no good square. You can maybe try knight to d3, bishop to d3, rook to d3, but still after f5 the game is simply lost. So really wild stuff. So I think to trap the bishop should be really one of your main ideas from white's perspective when you meet the Steiner variation. This was, I think, a dubious game by black. Black played many blunders here and got punished in an early stage of the game. So let's see now another example. Here after move knight to e4, it's a great game played by Anton Korobov against Pavel Vavra. Bishop to h5. Now comes this idea h3, which is my suggestion. I think after move bishop to g6, we can play now the move g4 without weaken the pawn structure in front of the king with the move f3. Here in the game knight to d7, challenging the knight to c4. We can now this move h5, and now g5 comes very dangerously. Here after move knight to d5, bishop to g2, queen to c7 now, and now queen to b3, attacking also the b7 pawn. Now after move e6, that's I think a great line that you can use now e4, simply getting attacks against these minor pieces. Anton Korobov played here an outstanding game, I think. After move knight to f4, bishop to f4 is a great possibility. After queen to f4, this is now great because it's not the same position like in this example that we have in the Ullman game where white played many tempi. I think black has lost also many tempi in this particular line. After move queen to f4, queen to b7 is a possibility, rook to d8, now queen to c6. You see, we're taking simply more pawns. Even if you take here, it's not a problem. I think we can even calculate here. The position is perfectly fine. We can play now f4, maybe even f5, even d5, e5. I think the activity of these two centralized knights, the activity of the bishop is perfectly fine. The queen is pinning the knight, so it's a decent game here for white. So after move queen to c6, black tried here to move bishop to b4. Again, white simply calculated, although this g5 is unprotected, but white has taken also some pawns, has taken the pawn on b7, has taken also the pawn on c6, so it's a perfect game here for white. So king to e7, trying to secure the king simply like this, but here knight to e5 play by Anton Korobov. We have knight to e5, and now a great move, queen to c7 in this position. Black resign. When if you try maybe king to the rook to d7, we'll simply play here queen to e5. We'll trade off the queens, queen to e5, d takes e5. You see the bishop is locked here. We can try now f4, f5. There's no good way, no good ways here for black to counterplay this position. The pawn storm on the king side, I think, is simply too much to handle for black. So even if you try bishop to c3, here b takes c3, still have an extra pawn. So black was disgusted by this position and simply resigned. So that's I think one of these approaches that you can make. Knight to e5, as said, after move bishop to h5, my recommendation, my honest recommendation, is to move h3, not to play the move f3. So h3, then g4, knight takes e4, g5, bishop to g2, here queen to b3. Now e4 is a possibility, bishop to f4, no problems here. The pawn central control is very dominant. We can take out this pawn. This pawn is a weakness. Rook to d1 is a possibility. King to Carlsen kingside, maybe even knight to e2, f4 are possibilities. So many great attacking possibilities here for white. So as said, these were some opening disasters in this Steiner variation of the Slav defense. We'll analyze now the Steiner variation more and more with also some top engine games. You see the top engine approach in this particular lines. In one game, Stockfish is also using this h3 at the end and g4. So we are analyzing the Steiner variation because, in my opinion, this Steiner variation would happen to you many times. And you see now there are also some great tactical opportunities for black to counterplay, to punish you if you play two passive moves, if you open the position in front of the king too much, if you don't secure the king by castling. I think you could be also very vulnerable to some attacks by black. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want to study the Slav defense more, please check out my Slav defense series so far. Here's the link of our series with some other great lines in this very cool opening. And if you have trouble maybe to play as black, check out my hyper accelerated Dragon Sicilian defense series as a good response to e4, and my Nimzo Indian defense series as a good response to d4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.